I just want to say welcome to all these wonderful friends. What a fabulous group of people gathering. What a joy.
I blame you for that.
Yeah, please let us know where you're calling from. And it's always fun to see who we're talking to, and also what really drew you to this conversation on governance tonight. Hello, Cher, see you there.
Grateful to have people introduce themselves in the chat.
Hi, Karima. Hi, Louis.
Oh, Shakri, how are you?
Better now that I'm here with all of you.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you, Shakti.
Great. Well, I'm sure there's still going to be a few people coming in, but maybe we should say, start at least with introductions and maybe governance for the evening before we get on to the conversation. So my name is Tamkeen, and I'm joined by Michael Lerner, who I'm sure most everyone knows, and Stan. And Michael will be leading the conversation with me this evening, and Stan and I will be monitoring the chat and any questions or thoughts or insights. So please use the chat. I'm very pleased that we have so many people to the second conversation of what we call the spring series, not really so much because it started in spring, but because it really aligns with the strategic hope, I guess, that we've been that is a feature of spring, but that we've also been wanting to try and develop in these conversations and really create a space to engage and inspire and really find different ways to respond to the challenges we have at the moment and navigating really our response. So this evening's conversation is exploring more about governance and its role in the polycrisis and its potential to prepare or present alternative systems for a more life-affirming society. And I came across the paper that was shared by, written by Louis last November, which I think you all got in the invitation. If you hadn't, we can share it afterwards. But really looking at why can't we fix the polycrisis, and at the root of it is the governance crisis. And I reached out to him to have a conversation and to explore. And as I was doing my homework, I read that he was doing work with the Tamkeen Community Foundation in Morocco. And I was quite delighted because I thought, despite feeling nervous with all his academic credentials, I knew something about Tamkeen, and I had never met anybody else who knew about Tamkeen. So I sort of felt I went into meeting him with at least knowing something. And so I was really delighted when he brought Karima into the circle, who is the co-founder of the Tamkeen Community Foundation. And for those who don't know what Tamkeen is, I'm sure she will expand. But in a nutshell, for me, it's a Moroccan equivalent of Ubuntu, the South African concept of Ubuntu. And I'm sure Karima might elaborate on that. So, so before I just hand over to Michael, just if I can say a word about governance, if you can keep your cameras on, especially when you're speaking, it's always great to see who's in the room. And if you can keep your mics off until you're speaking, that would be great as well. And really you want to encourage you to use the chat. In our last conversation, the chat was used so richly and it became a real source for people.
Maybe there's something that we could say.
I'm not sure who that is, but
1 second.
So I think maybe somebody in Michael. So
no, I'm good.
Yeah, so thank you for joining, and I'm going to hand over to Michael, who will start the conversation.
Thank you, Tamsin, and welcome to all the remarkable friends who are gathered here. This is, to me, a quite extraordinary opportunity because I think that both Louis and Karima have have bring to us an authentic opportunity to address some issues that in much of the polycrisis dialogue are underestimated. And I think the fundamental point, which Tamkeen has pointed to, and that Louis makes central to his paper, is that at the heart of the polycrisis is a crisis of governance. And I think what Karima adds to that is that at the heart of the governance crisis is a crisis of consciousness. And that in order to achieve the transformative impact on governance that we need, we really do need a fundamental shift in consciousness. And I want to suggest to you, and I'll bring this up in more detail later, but that I believe from my own studies in consciousness, I'm in the middle of our 220th week-long Commonweal Cancer Help Program over the last almost 40 years, living with people with cancer for a week at a time, that when people are faced with a potentially fatal cancer diagnosis, there very often is a transformation of consciousness. It's very real, and it moves toward humanizing and toward love. And it is very possible that the global polycrisis is that near-death experience that humanity needs in order to make this transformation. And we know in history that not only in individual lives, but also in societal lives, that great wars, great crises do indeed shift consciousness in fundamental ways. So as we look for authentic hope in the polycrisis, it seems to me that recognizing this dual challenge that Louis and Karima have offered us, that at the heart of the polycrisis is a crisis in governance, and at the heart of the crisis in governance is a crisis in consciousness. So with that, starting in conversation with Louis, I think you've given us a truly magisterial review of the evolution of systems and cyber systems theory from Heidegger introducing it into philosophy, which I didn't know about, to Dano Meadows' seminal report to the Club of Rome and the important contribution of a Turkish researcher before that. And from the global problematique formulation to the polycrisis formulation with the strengths and weaknesses of both formulations.
I'm listening to something.
Excuse me?
Sorry, that was somebody not on mute. It's okay.
So, Louis, give us a sense. Well, let's start with this question. You note both the strengths and the weaknesses of both the global problematique and the polycrisis formulation. What do you see that the global problematique offers that the polycrisis does not give us in the same depth?
Thank you so very much, Michael and Tamkeen, for the introduction and hosting us tonight. It's a real delight. Well, it has been a real delight ever since, from the first conversation onwards. And I'm so grateful that tonight we decided just to do a conversation, and having Karima with us, and I wouldn't do without her, for a lot that we could say about governance and polycrisis and growing a shared understanding of what we're in, what is, what could be, connects to our lived experience. And that is probably already a first hint that in a lot of the perspective of today in the discourses, we lost the connection to the lived experience in its totality, in its wholeness. We're rationalizing a lot and leave out a lot of the human condition. But I go back to your question, Michael. When we were writing the paper, and I'm just one of the authors, and it came out of the International Federation for Systems Research, where we are a peak body for the systems community the systems research worldwide, and in that we are in the legacy of the global problematic, looking with systemic research, systemic instruments into how does what we see, what we experience on the globe is connecting to each other, and how does that constitute that predicament of mankind, as I say, leading up to the first publication of the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth. When we were talking about governance crisis, we were looking at the relevance of that in terms of not a root cause. And when we say it sits underneath the polycrisis, I always like to go to that example of ocean health. If we look at the state of the oceans and their health, or rather sickness, we come to acknowledge that with all, with all the activities around collecting plastic, cleaning beaches, and all that we see on so many YouTube videos, there's only been one activity, one collective action that made a measurable difference in ocean health. And that was the introduction of fishing quota. That was a collective action which allowed the oceans, allowed the seas of the world to relax a bit. And that was the only activity that ever produced something that was measurable. And it was not something that intervened immediately in the ocean. On the contrary, it was a collective agreement to not do that, to hold back, to respect the capacity of the ocean to regenerate. And it was a governance measure that made the difference. And so that brought us into resonating with all that we're looking at in terms of the polycrisis, be it climate change, the loss of biodiversity, be it poverty, be it violence, and the list, I think, is as long as we can think. But all has to do with how do we agree to live together? Where do we draw boundaries that protect, that regulate, that allow us to be together in the most delightful way, in human co-flourishing and societal harmony? And this is where Tamkeen comes in, and the language of Tamkeen. I'd like to end on one last thought about governance and systems. When we look at the governance crisis, if you look at the polycrisis from the perspective or in the mirror of system sciences, we may need to remind ourselves that system sciences always have been a promise of wholeness and agency, connecting the dots and being able to do something. And if you look back the last 50 years in the Club of Rome and the discipline of system sciences and cybernetics back to the Marcy conferences in the end of the 40s, has always been that promise, generation after generation. The systems experts, the practice experts, the value experts, they were all promising that wholeness and tried to broaden their perspective. Yet, what they never left in that perspective was the idea to be of themselves, to be a science. And as we know of science, science is science because there's non-science as well. It rules out something. It rules out everything that is not rational. It rules out everything that does not follow the method. And if we, and that is my answer to your question, if we look at what was missed with the looking at the polycrisis and going back to the system dynamics models of the global problematique is the wholeness of the human condition, the wholeness of the human experience. And I loved it so very much, Michael, when you introduced our conversation going to that life-shifting moment for these cancer patients to recognize and realize what defines and connects us in the world and to each other and to the planet and to ourselves, which is our humanity. And this is where we are, and this is where I can only embrace with a lot of hope what you said, Michael, to make that moment in history, looking or facing the polycrisis, that shift of consciousness. I leave it here, and you might want to unmute yourself, Michael.
Thank you so much, Louis. I have much more to ask you, but let me turn to Karima now for an introductory conversation. Karima, I've been so taken by what you are doing in Morocco with the Tamkeen approach to education specifically, and your passion for it, and your very clear, explicit statement that what is needed in education and in society is an approach based in love. And I think it takes a rare courage to say it that directly. How would you describe the Tamkeen approach to us?
Thank you very much, Michael, Tanzim, and everyone who's here with us today. I'm truly delighted, as Louis expressed himself, to be here in this beautiful conversation. The conversation that I feel very much is in continuity with the first conversation with Jeremy. That was very, very inspiring conversation. Isn't it in itself this very question, Michael, revealing that it takes courage to talk about love? Isn't it revealing about our understanding of life and how we choose to express it or not? I will start by sharing a story that I've shared so many times, and friends who are here and who know the story will hear it maybe for the 5th or the 6th time or more. But I think it is so telling. It was in 2011, 2010, where we met this neighborhood community as an organization, as members of Tamkeen, who experience ourselves the Tamkeen experience and the Tamkeen process. And we did not know that that neighborhood was very violent, that the perception of the neighborhood in itself was a perception of violence, and the perception that the outer world had of the neighborhood was a neighborhood of violence. We met them because they were not lacking something, but because in their community, they had many community initiatives that spoke about a sense of community, a sense of responsibility for each other, a sense of co-creation, an experience of co-creation. So we wanted to meet them. And when they met us, they were very much surprised that we were not coming with something to give them or to show them or to tell them, but much rather to say, can we learn together? Can we grow an understanding together? Because Tamkeen Community Foundation was born from that understanding of coming together. Many years afterwards, having experienced and witnessed a lot of violence in this process, in this relationship. I remember going to the community, and one young man, we were all sitting in the community house, and one young man said, well, yesterday we were sitting in the cafe, and we were talking about violence happening in the neighborhood. And then we stopped and we said, why are we talking about it like this? We realized that our expectation was violence every week, violence every day, and high levels of violence, killing. And we realized that for almost 2 years, we haven't had violence. And we thought, well, what has happened? What has changed? And they said the houses are the same, the streets are the same, the people are the same. Nothing has changed, but everything has changed. He said, before, violence used to bring us together. Today, violence, love brings us together. And we realize that all these community initiatives that we have co-created together are only but a reason to remain together. That was in 2019. That young man met this researcher and he said, before the Tamkeen experience, there was violence, and after that, there was no violence. And he says, no. Before the experience of Tamkeen, there was love. And today there is love. But before, we did not express love with love. So that very experience of recognizing, of remembering, is very much what you were talking about earlier. I think maybe in those moments, terrible moments, where we confronted with our own finite selves, maybe at that moment, we realize that in that finite self that has limits, we are infinite when we connect to our shared humanity. And that connection is an expression of love. So when we reflect in that mirror that we call Tamkeen, we recognize. And by recognizing, we realize the beauty that we have in our systems, in our societies, and in our communities. And by realizing it, we realize it.
So, first, that's beautiful. Thank you, Karima. And secondly, you're working with the entire educational system of Morocco, and so you're getting real traction in that community. And to me, it is these experiences, these local experiences, like I talked about, the work with cancer patients and the truly transformation experiences they have in near-death connection. And you're talking about a similar thing at a community level. And we know that in the face of great disasters, people frequently come together. And there's a generosity and a kindness and a mutual support. You know, people say kindness is love with its work boots on. And so there's a sense when in crises that people come together. The problem is that after the crisis fades, very often we go back to older ways of being together. So in the Tamkeen work, how do you address that, that challenge of keeping the kindness and the mutuality alive in a systemic situation? How do you address the tendency for us to fall back into the illusion of separateness?
I will share with you another story, and this time with the Minister of Education.
Yeah.
That was the first time I was going to meet him. Not this current Minister of Education, but the previous one. I was invited to go and to share the experience that we had with the education system and neighborhoods, and experiencing the dissolvence of the distinction between the school community and the neighborhood communities, where the relationship was becoming a relationship of recognizing ourselves as one. So the minister had heard about that experience, vaguely. Maybe what he heard the most is the trust that grew with the education system, an extraordinary trust between ourselves as an organization, as a team, and the ministries and the education system teams. So I shared a poster. I had 2 posters, and I shared the first poster. And I said, Minister, can I share this poster with you? Can I ask you, what do you see? And he looks at me a bit puzzled, and he looks at it and he says, well, I can see it's black and white. It seems to be a forest. I can't see anything else. I said, Minister, I can see something in that picture that you can't see. And he looks at me very surprised and he says, well, what is it? Do you want to see it? He says, yes. So I show him the same picture in color. And when I show him the same picture in color, he says, oh, I see it now. So immediately I cover the color picture and I go back to the black and white. I said, can you see it now? He says, yes. He says, that is your challenge.
Uh-huh.
How do you see what you can't see?
Mm.
A second ago, you could not see it. Now you cannot unsee it. And then he says, well, what do you have in your second poster? So then I showed him this famous picture that everybody knows, the Ibn Arabi parable of the elephant. The blind men who've never seen an elephant before and who are told this is an elephant, and who feel what the elephant is, and they say, what is the elephant? And the one who feels the trunk says the elephant is a snake, and the one who feels the wool, the elephant is the back, the elephant is a wool. The ones who feel the ears, the elephant is a leaf, a big leaf. Nobody lied. All expressed what they perceived. And what they perceived was connected to what they knew, to what they previously perceived. So the same way it was a challenge of the minister to see, that did not mean that I could see. That meant that there are things he could see, and there are things that I could see, and there's so many other things that we still can't see. But together, we can co-create the conditions to widen the gaze. That widening of the gaze being an expression of growing and understanding, a shared understanding, that is to live today in the education system, to go to where the light is. Where is the beauty in the education system? To look at the things that we don't look at, that we don't even look for. And to be able to look at them and recognize them and grow them by watering them. To look at expressions of trust and look at expressions of love and water them. And love is watered by love, and trust is watered by trust. This is when the minister stands up and he gives me his phone number and he says, call me now. He wanted to make sure I had his number. We worked together very closely.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Louis, I'd like to come back to you now. You and Karima both have, I can see, a background in philosophy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have started the paper going back to Heidegger introducing the systems approach into philosophy. And I want to take a moment to sort of look at this both in a systems approach and a philosophical approach, because I'm very interested in the issue of consciousness, and which Karima, of course, has made central to her work. And up until the late 19th century, early 20th century, the default view in philosophy was that consciousness was not just an epiphenomenon of the human brain, that it was, in fact, a part of the structure of the universe. And it was sort of materialist science, empiricist materialist science that destroyed that perspective and gave us the view that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of the human brain, and that we live in an entirely random universe without any meaning other than that which we assign to it. And so, but what's happening now is that consciousness is having a resurgence in neuroscience and in many other areas. And what the ancient philosophy that's called panpsychism, namely that consciousness is a function of the universe as a whole, is experiencing a rebirth. And the reason I bring this up is that if this brings us back to the philosophical traditions of panpsychism and of idealism and what is now called analytic idealism, that consciousness is actually either primary or a central constituent of the universe. This was true for Plato and Leibniz and, Russell and William James and many others. So my question to you is whether or not you have any resonance with that philosophical tradition that's experiencing a rebirth, because if that's true, if the crisis in contemporary physics, that the standard model of materialist physics no longer holds up because they see constellations older than the Big Bang and they can't get the cosmological constants to agree. And Stephen Hawking, the great physicist, his last book or his last approach was Stephen Hawking's final theory in Thomas Herzog's The Origin of Time. Hawking's final theory was that consciousness was not an epiphenomenon, that it was central to the ongoing evolution of the world, of the cosmos. So the question I'm posing really to both of you is, can we take that on board? Because if we take it on board, then a certain whole set of anomalies that don't fit in standard materialist science, like the anthropic principle that the universe appears perfectly designed to support life, all of these things coalesce in a universe in which consciousness and values and purpose are native and original to consciousness, and that we as conscious instruments can recover and remember that tradition. So I understand this is a difficult question, which neither of you may have contemplated, but again, you might have, and this is a real conversation. So I'll start with Louis and then go back to Karima to ask, since you're both trained in philosophy, whether this return to idealism and analytic idealism and panpsychism, that consciousness is either primary or a major constituent, it opens up a profound avenue for hope that this crisis may be a near-death experience that reconnects us and helps us remember our true heritage. Louis, your reflections.
Thank you, Michael. What can I say? Well, love is the answer. And I think everything else revolves around that. If you ask me about philosophy, I personally very much a man of phenomenology and hermeneutics. Phenomenology for really looking at the experience that informs and forms our understanding, our consciousness. And hermeneutics as the question how that understanding comes about. And what is it actually, that understanding? And if you take the two together, you come to something called hermeneutic phenomenology. Heidegger, for that matter, is the major proponent of it. And if we go there, and this is where I slowly on the longer trail come back to you, he speaks of the truth of existence, which ventures a wholeness that couldn't be greater, that looks at everything that is, and that informs and forms our experiences. Not only on that direct, sensitive level, but also in its reflection. So he speaks of the being of being, which is conceptual, but that conceptual layer informs and forms our experience as well. It informs and forms our perception. But what Heidegger indicates here, and that we see in all spiritual wisdom traditions, may it be the Advaita Vedanta in the Vedics, may it be the Shunyata for the Buddhists, may it be the Tao for the Taoists, or may it be Wadat al-Wujud, as even Arabi would call it. So the unity of that existence, where everything is interconnected and interdependent. To think, to perceive, to experience everything from that wholeness in that wholeness, and if reflected from there. This is very much the promise of wholeness that we read in system sciences or cybernetics. So that is something that gives us an idea of what that is to understand. Yet, in a hermeneutic tradition, looking at understanding, we may acknowledge that understanding is as much growing as it must be impermanent. Well, the Buddhists know a lot about it, but the system scientists would just say, if you understand what is and what could be in that very moment, the next moment everything has changed. So there is a different set of the universe informing and forming your experience. Nevertheless, it grows over time. And if we still speak of philosophy, we may want to go back to Hegel and his phenomenology of the spirit, which he describes as an understanding, a growing understanding that understands itself as a growing understanding. And that whenever it meets what he calls the negative, that what is not yet understood, that triggers that dialectic process of going to the in-between and growing a new, possibly a shared understanding of what is and what could be. And I close on a systems note here. That very distinction of what is and what could be, which is sort of at the center of any biological and cognitive processing of any living being. Well, I can die now or tomorrow, but I didn't die yesterday, so that's off the screen. Niklas Luhmann, one of the great German sociologists, ventured system theory, and for him, the unity of the distinction between what is and what could be, he calls meaning. That what informs us about the relationship of what is and what could be, what informs our experiences now about what is now and what could be tomorrow. So that connects back, and then I close here, to Jeremy, who went to the polycrisis as a crisis of meaning. And I leave it here, and guess I hand over to Karima.
Yes, well, thank you, Louis. And I think, while this may seem abstract to some of our participants and listeners, the fact remains that if the polycrisis is, as you say, a crisis of governance, and if governance in turn depends on creating a humanizing society, and therefore it's a crisis of consciousness, then the nature of consciousness matters. That's the point. And the question is whether we are dealing with an outdated understanding of consciousness, which in materialist science is just an epiphenomenon of the brain, and none of it matters, it's just all random, or whether we are in fact able, especially in crisis and life-threatening situations, to remember our true heritage. And that true heritage is, in fact, healing is fundamentally, in fact, based in love. So, Karima, back to you. My memory of our previous conversations is that the concept of remembrance is, in fact, critically important to you. Do I remember that correctly? You're on mute, Karima.
Yes, yes. Well, I will go back to the wisdom that our languages behold, all our languages, and the wisdom that we behold, because when we hear wisdom, we recognize it, and if we recognize wisdom, we can only recognize what is in us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So I go to the meaning of meaning.
Yeah.
Meaning is defined as that which is meant to be expressed, or as sense, or as remembering.
Mm-hmm.
In Arabic, insan, human being, has the same root as nisyan, forgetting.
Mm.
And there is a beautiful rahma there. Rahma is compassion. And the womb of the mother is called compassion, has the same root as compassion.
Beautiful.
The womb of the mother being where love and life blossoms. And that love and life that blossoms transform the love and life that created its conditions. That is very much a way, one of the ways that we can express Tamkeen, that very process, that Mekeen, the womb of the mother, where we remember, where we come together, where we recognize each other no longer in our roles, in our functions, and how much money we have, or how smart we are intellectually, or how conscious, how awakened we are. We leave all those hierarchies and categories and classifications and categories and measurements just to meet each other. And gratitude, to meet each other in humility. Realizing that each one of us has only been able to fathom part of the elephant. And yes, what you are asking, what happens when we leave the crisis? You know, going back to the actually extraordinary wisdom of our language. Crisis comes from krisis in Greek, and it means a decisive point in the progress of a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And healing. It's a call for healing. And a call for healing, the root of healing, the etymology of healing is whole, to become whole again, to remember again. And it takes us back to humanity, how we understand it, being what defines us and connects us to each other, to our natural world, to the whole beyond our conscious grasp, and to accept that, but to trust that. So it's rather than beyond a calling for consciousness, it's a calling for trusting our humanity, what defines us and connects us to the whole beyond a conscious grasp.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. Tamsin would like to make a comment, and also we've reached the 45-minute point where we were going to move into dialogue, and Thomas Lent just wrote, I would like to hear others present their views, and this is the moment to begin to do that. We also thank all of those who have commented so far. I just want to close this segment with a quote from Sri Aurobindo, who said, the future, if there is to be a future, must wear a crown of feminine design. And so that seems to be an appropriate point on which to end this. Tamsin, you wanted
Yes,
to
Michael.
make a comment.
Actually, I wanted to surface Indra's, in fact, now 3 questions. So I would love to hand the floor over to her. I think one is for Louis and probably 1.5 each, really. And then I know Tom's question was really inviting. I think any other, Louis, I think the example of the fishing quotas and looking at governance, but I'm going to hand over to Indra because she asked this question. So Indra, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, Tamsin, I didn't get you queuing me up there. So is this the question? Okay, I mean, we've had a little bit longer since I asked that question, so I'm going to come at it with a slightly different angle. When I listen to you, Karima, my whole being is saying yes. You know, and I listen to, I've seen videos of yours before, and I'm saying yes. I can feel what it is that you're conveying. I think if I was standing next to you, I'd feel it very powerfully. At the same time, I have to ask the question, how do people at all different levels of agency really experience this word love? In my own experience, so many people would reject love as an idea because it's a luxury for them. They didn't experience it growing up. They don't experience it in their communities. They're struggling with their day-to-day lives and so on. And love would seem irrelevant as a first, as a first offer. However, when you make relationship, when you build community, when you give attention to people, then slowly trust develops and slowly love can be mentioned, but it's sometime down the line. So I really wanted to ask, really to slow the process down a little bit and talk about almost like on a day-to-day basis, what were the actions you took? What are the actions that you take that open up the possibility of love between people? And even as I'm holding that question, I'm experiencing and thinking, is the teacher, if you are the teacher, I can think of many teachers of love, how much of that is charismatic? How much do you depend on drawing people towards you, them feeling what I call your soft power, being drawn into relationship with the sound of your voice, your being in their presence and so on, which I want to contrast actually. And I think, Michael, you just gave me permission to do this right at the end, a little bit with when we talk theoretically about love, how it actually seems to push me further and further away from that being of love. It becomes a puzzle for my left brain. It becomes a challenge, which is almost like an academic challenge. It's something that's even more out of my reach the closer we get to Heidegger. I love the contrast between Heidegger and Hannah Arendt, the immediacy of her teaching, something very different. So I'm going to stop now, but really the thing was, if love is the call, what is the process to get to love?
Indra, I just want to say, I think that's a beautiful comment. And let's collect some other comments before coming back to Karima. Other reflections, or Tamsin, do you want to pull something off the chat that you want to mention?
I would probably keep that dialogue going, but I know there's one other question that has been waiting. Yes, and I can't see your first name, which is why I feel very impolite in not knowing how to.
Sorry, Chakri.
Chakri.
Yeah, yes. So this is a question for Louis. The question for Louis is, do you see governance as a necessary precondition to consciousness shifts? And I don't see that. And the question to Karima is, the conditions that you describe for the emergence of love are a specific set of conditions that you observe in Morocco. I don't see them in India. It's a different set of conditions, but love does and can emerge for sure. And that's the kind of thing that I would wanted to respond to Walter's concerns there. I think anyway, let me stop there.
Fabulous. And let's continue to just pull in some other comments, since this is a conversation, and then give Karima and Louis another chance. Other reflections.
I think maybe we want to start with Indra's, because I see it's been seconded by quite a few people. So, you know.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So Indra's comment, does talking about love push us away from the felt experience? Is that right, Indra? And that, you know, it comes further down the line after one has established community and trust. Karima, reflection on that?
Well, thank you, Indra. Maybe it's a bit similar to listening to a beautiful melody that you feel deeply inside, deeply touches you. And as soon as you start describing it, you're not hearing it anymore. So if you describe it, you can describe the notes, you can describe the different moments, but you're not in the melody anymore. So yes, you're saying, how do people experience this word love? Well, we cannot. If it's experiencing a word is not the experience. You said it yourself in your question. It's something that is not a word that we experience. A word is only about a concept. It's an abstract. Our words, at the best, try to resemble our experience. But as we are experiencing this process of deep human connection, we co-reflect it. And as we co-reflect it, we try to find the language that resembles the experience. And then we grow the language. And we grow this language together, and by growing this language, it allows us to further widen the possibility of thought and the possibility of imagination. The possibility of imagination in the sense of that between. That is so fertile, that is so fecund, that is just our different understandings where they shed their lights on that between. Then we can reveal that twilight of a shared understanding, a new shared understanding, a new meaning, as Jeremy was mentioning in the previous conversation. This process, and that I connect this to what Michael was said. How do we not go back to where we were and forget again and again and again? As we do, well, we deeply reflect the lived experience. And as Louis was saying, we grow a shared understanding. We grow a shared understanding. And that very understanding is transformation. And we grow this language. It's very much a logopoetic process where we grow the language. And what we have as humanity, and as I emphasize again and again, is the wisdom that our languages behold. When we reflect it in different languages and delight at that wisdom.
Yeah, you probably have seen from my chats that I'm getting skeptical here. And I think my skepticism is part of the sort of epistemology that we have here at the moment. I mean, we have identified the polycrisis, and the polycrisis is a collection of a whole bunch of different systems going belly up. You know, it is not just the crisis at the physical side, it's also a crisis of our personal understanding, and it is a crisis of governance, and so on and so on. But looking at polycrisis in that abstracted, overarching perspective, we come to the monocausal conclusion that all we need is better governance. That actually we cannot address polycrises without better governance. And that is entirely correct. But there are also many, many other things that we need to understand the polycrisis and to be prepared, to not only be prepared for the next polycrisis, but also are necessary for us to cope with the polycrisis that we have at the moment, or the many polycrises we have at the moment. And then we argue, okay, we need better governance, and that needs better democratic structures. And therefore, again, in a monocausal perspective, we are saying, okay, in order to do that, we need more love, right? And then we had the discussion about what the heck is love actually. And I'm saying what the heck because I can see the world not necessarily full of love, but also full of conflict and full of disagreement and full of I hate your guts and full of if you don't agree with me, I shoot you, and so on and so on and so on. So within that, we are now at the stage of thinking, okay, how can we define love? And the definition of love then becomes so ephemeral, so untouchable, so self-reflective that actually we are now defining love in a way that is self-reflective, and then we use the idea of self-reflective love as a way to think about governance, and then we think about governance as the only way to solve us. So I think we are in the sequence of our analysis, we are coming from a multifaceted, really big pile of problems into we need love. And I think the problem I have with that is that actually we are going from a complex system, from a review of complex systems into something that is abstracted, into something that is ephemeral, into something that actually helps the poor people that we are supposed to support really in the day-to-day life, not very much. So I feel the sort of, flames
Well,
coming up.
Walter, first of all, I want to say how much I deeply appreciate what you've done here, because this is supposed to be a conversation, and it actually is. And you brought back in, whatever we want to call the realist perspective in a powerful way. And I doubt that there are many of us here who actually disagree with you about the incredibly tragic, almost insoluble nature of the polycrisis, which many of us have devoted decades to. So I don't think there's actually a lot of disagreement about that. And in your comments and the thing, this will not address the 1.5 billion people that today live on $1 a day. In fact, I would not be surprised if any of these people would appreciate that our solution to their hideously impoverished livelihoods would be to love each other more. So I'm really grateful that you bring that back in. But I would suggest that we're not really talking about an ephemeral definition of love. We are really asking the question, at least I'm asking the question, I think Karima is, and I suspect Louis is, what is, and I didn't hear Louis say that governance was the only crisis in the polycrisis, but that it was central. And in my judgment, following the literature and the dialogue on the polycrisis, it's all about the other factors. We don't hear much about governance. We hear mostly about climate change and toxic chemicals and population and all the physical factors, the donut economics thing. It's all physical. There isn't a lot of attention paid to governance. And yes, there is attention paid to consciousness in some circles. The hope is some kind of transformation of consciousness. So I just think what's valuable here is to bring these almost diametrically opposed ideas together in dialogue. But I don't think we're thinking of an ephemeral definition of love. I think that the definition of love that we're talking about is the question of whether a shift of consciousness is possible. And I do, at this point, want to go back to Louis, who has his hand up, actually, to make a comment. Louis?
Yes. Thank you so very much. And Walter and Indra and Chakri. I love the energy that going to the love brings to you. And I wouldn't call that realistic. I would call that, in a very, very positive way, romantic and hopeful, that there is something beyond all that we could so rationalize and that we experience in the different moments, that seems to bring us away from the love and not allows us to experience it. If we go back to Tamkeen as an approach, as an experience, as a process, I like to explain it, or the Tamkeen experience, as the experience that you would have if you sit together with a good friend and just talk about the things that happened to you last week and whether they are the fools or you are the fool, and what to make out of all of that. You're co-reflecting lived experiences with a friend, and you grow a shared understanding in that very moment. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be handsome, beautiful, or anything. You just have to be a genuine friend to a friend. And it doesn't matter where on the globe you live. Yet in that conversation, and that's the important thing that we always tend to overlook if we sort of gallop on just looking at the experience and what we talk about. That is that in the conversation with a friend, in each that we say, in every utterance, we're not talking or sharing an experience, but we also reaffirm the quality of the relationship with our friend. The melody that Karima was talking about earlier, which allows us to co-create a safe space that is embracing, where I feel the warmth, a nourishing, a nurturing space where I leave the conversation much richer, much more balanced, well-fed emotionally than I entered it. And this experience is at the very, very center of all that we've been talking about so far. Why are our conversations, be it in science, be it in politics, be it in economics, conversations that exclude the relationship, losing what makes us human beings? And if we don't bring it back, if we rationalize about all the problems, the predicaments, and the polycrisis, we are drinking salty water. It will not allow us to be nurtured. It will not allow us to come up with something that is life-sustaining, life-enhancing, or even something that we can call human co-flourishing. Wholeness has to do a lot with healing. We heal if we become whole. And what I resonate with so strongly as a system scientist, in the mirror of Tamkeen, realizing the limitations of my science as a science, having excluded the most beautiful elements of our human condition, to say, hang on, we need to reopen. We need to start our conversations about everything, about development, about science, about governance, from the very beginning, from that conversation that is as much experience-based as it is relationship-oriented. That is the co-creation and co-facilitation. That is a process of inquiry, learning and understanding, embedded in epistemic humility, not a competition of knowledge. And that, in that experience, I say love again, allows us to, invites us to trust our human potential, to trust our humanity, and to realize the essentiality and existentiality of love. I'll leave it here.
Well, I love that. And I love this dialogue with Walter. And this is exactly what good conversation among friends actually creates. And I want to say that it is the precisely that who is gathered here totally get how absolutely desperate the polycrisis is, and that we are looking for authentic sources of hope. And I do believe, coming back to the title of this conversation, that in the conversation about the polycrisis, that governance has been very underplayed, very underestimated. And I think that this marriage of systems theory and cyber systems research that Louis has been at the forefront of, and that he has been tracking for a very long time through its different manifestations, that this deserves a fundamental place in the conversation about the polycrisis, which it has not had to date. And it does raise the issue of consciousness one way or another. And we've been bold enough to use the word love, but as Indra pointed out, maybe that word comes down further down the line. And what Louis then says is, if you were talking to a friend, so that, kindness and sort of mutuality and the human experience of coming together with people, as Louis says, this is what's left out of his system science. So I just think that this conversation does move us forward to both appreciating the desperation of the polycrisis, that we don't see a way out, that all different kinds of foundations and NGOs are offering hope in one form or another, and that we are exploring whether governance specifically and consciousness as it relates to kindness and community and trust and hope may help us find a way. Joan Diamond, you've been so central to all of this. I'd love to hear your reflections. She's shaking her head, but maybe she'll tune in.
Joan, it would be very nice. Then I would like to just raise Asher's question, because I think it's very interesting. And in fact, Asher,
oh, great. I didn't see it. Great.
The European Union have also just appointed, I think, a commissioner for future generations. But I think Walter and Shakri were also waiting to contribute. And it would be nice to get some other voices in the room. So I would love your thoughts, Lou, on Asher's question. And Walter and Shakri, if you want to make a comment into that before Louis responds.
My only issue was the only thing I wanted to flag is Louis. I mean, Louis, you are a very eminent systems thinker, and within that, you know far better than anybody else here that we have systems that are that are part of human benefit but are not part of human design. We have living systems, we have got complex systems, we've got autopoietic and allopoietic systems, and so on and so on and so on. And most of those systems are really important for us. So why do we focus on love within the social system at the exclusion of the entire consciousness or unconsciousness of all those many other systems that we depend on? I just can't see this, that we are saying actually humans must be more self-conscious, humans need to be more self-aware about our activities, we need to love ourselves much more, and yet many of the systems that we are engaging with have no consciousness, have no living component with that, have no self-referential, have no components to that, but that probably would get us into systems theory, and that's probably is far further away from that. So I better shut up on this.
Thank you, Walter. Shakri, do you want to make a comment? But I'd really love, Louis, your thoughts on Asher's question, and both of your thoughts. Shakri, can't hear you.
having basked, nourished myself with Karima and Louis the last 3 years, the way I see love coming in is when the what Louis refers to as co-reflections. And for me, that's the churning that we need to do, the inner work as well as the collective inner work. So what I see in the Tamkeen space is the children and the teachers and the administrators are now co-reflecting with each other, and that's churning. So if there was collective anxiety or hate or whatever, those things get worked out, and then there's nothing else left but love. And that's my, and there's a feminine story to it, but I think I'll leave it for some other time. From the I think from the Mahabharata, I think.
Thank you, Shakri. Louis, I don't know if you saw Ashur's question, which is whether Wales placing responsibility to future generations into its governance is an example of love in governance.
Actually, Karima can answer that much better than I do. I could. But on that, I always just catch one moment before I hand over to Karima, which gives her, buys her a bit of time, is to go back to Walter and embrace that again. If we look at the polycrisis, if we look at the governance crisis, the crisis of meaning, the crisis of agency or control, the systems we surrounded ourselves with are manifestations of our understanding of how the world works, how we work in the world, how we want to govern ourselves, or how we believe we must govern ourselves, how we believe this or that in our understanding, in our shared understanding. And the line I try to draw here is, let's go at the very beginning of, and this links back to the hermeneutics. Where does our understanding start? We learn from experiences. Children learn from experience, adults learn from experience, we all do. And we do learn collectively, co-reflecting these experiences to come to a shared understanding, which informs our ideas how to bring about whatever we call as a system later on, our understanding of politics, the economy, of education, of science, and how whole, how healed is this understanding if it is from the very beginning an understanding that is not embracing our human condition in its fullest, in the essentiality and existentiality of love. Frederick III once did this infamous experiment to see what natural language children would speak, Hebrew, Latin, or Greek. So he brought together a bunch of babies and had them being raised without being spoken to see what language comes out of them. Before they reached the age of an ability to say anything, they were all dead. They did not get that affection. They did not feel safe and nurtured in the world. They died. And that existentiality prevails. That's a longing, and that, because we know this is part of us. We can call it many names, but we have one nice word describing it, which is love. And this is where it comes together for me as a system scientist. Yes, all these systems that surround us, they shape our world, but how can we reshape these systems. Only it has to do with consciousness and has to do with what is it that we grow our understanding from and how do we do that. On that note, I hand over to Karima.
Thank you, Louis. What a beautiful way to hand over. I would go to how much as humanity we have failed, as human beings we have failed. We have completely failed despite all our expertise, despite crystallizing in our systems, in our governance models, in our schools, in our societies, in our algorithms today, despite crystallizing in all these things that are expressions of human activity, human thought, human organization. We have crystallized extraordinary ways to dehumanize ourselves. And yet, despite all this expertise, we have failed to dehumanize ourselves. The mere fact that we're having this conversation today, the way we're having it, the questions we have, the fear we'll have to speak about love. Do we dare? Do we dare go there? Do we dare think that a human being is actually deeply, profoundly, primordially, viscerally a loving human being? And yes, we do have extremes. We do have terrible things happening. But at the same time that we have terrible things happening in Gaza, extreme dehumanization, we have extraordinary expressions of humanity in Gaza at the very moment that we're talking. We have them both. We hold them both. This is what happens when systems start transforming. It's not one day to the other. It's not the this. It's not the revolution, disrupt. It's very much into holding together and learning together to navigate with wisdom. Isn't that what we're looking for in governance? Governance in Arabic is hekama. The root is wisdom. Governance in its Greek etymology, it means navigate, to navigate. We are able to learn together to navigate with wisdom and to navigate the wisdom that is in us and that we are able to recognize. So yes, we have failed to dehumanize. What do we do with that? To be able to shed the light on all the beauty there is, not discarding and disregarding the realities, the harsh realities of expressions of humanity that are not humanity, of expressions of love that are not love, but love is there. This is what my friend and colleague and young man from this neighborhood said. Love was there, but we did not express love with love, we expressed it with violence. And we're there to remind each other, to be mirrors to each other. Today in Morocco, what we're experiencing is that the language of Ensenet al-Mandoma, a humanizing education system, Ensenet al-Idara, a humanizing administration, a humanizing school, is a language that's slowly spoken, and that we recognize, and that gives meaning, and that allows for this energy, for that flow, for that water to circulate, and to find this way to the ocean. Not to stagnate, wondering what it is, why it is, and who it is. The question we have in Tamkeen is a question that lights the paths, the different paths in this process. How can our schools, communities, societal systems, governance models, societies be an expression and a reflection of the humanity that defines us and connects us? And it's an invitation to grow an understanding of what does it mean to trust our humanity? What does it mean to trust a humanity where everything is telling us and telling to our brain, to the most primitive part of our brain, you cannot trust, you have to fear. But this is a time to trust. This is a time to trust. And we are experiencing how when we are in that trust, when we are in that gratitude, when we are able to recognize and to realize the beauty, then we truly realize it. So when we have this process in an education system in a country, in a higher education, today in the legal system, future lawyers, future judges are reflecting how can our laws be a reflection of our humanity? Let's reflect the spirit of the laws and not only the modalities and the procedures of our laws. When we have this conversation happening in the governance models of neighborhoods, of villages, of families, when we have that as a society, a deep experience of what governance means, when in schools we have 200 students coming together, taking consensually decisions and sharing with the director of the governance institution at the province level, who invited them, well, you were only 200 in the school, why don't you invite more? They said, we will. But we will take the decisions consensually. This is how we function. What is it telling us about our ability as human beings to express our humanity with humanity, in humanity? We can only disarm the inhumanity with humanity. That is a deep calling for trust. How can our governance models become an experience of wisdom, a collective experience of wisdom at all levels of our society, not only government?
Karima, thank you so much for that. And we're coming to the close now. First of all, I just want to thank Louis and Karima for these absolutely wonderful presentations, and I'm so grateful to have participated. Joan Diamond, I asked you if you had a comment, and you came online, and then we went other places. Is there something you would like to say? I would welcome it.
You know, I don't think that I think that Karima and Louis have brought us to a beautiful sort of moment in the conversation, one where we can leave not with conclusion or finality or direction, but richer thinking about the challenge ahead. And beyond that, there are, of course, always a lot of things I could say, but I don't think they would add to the group or the thinking or how we leave. So I thank all of you.
All right. And Tamsin, any final reflections from you on this quite remarkable conversation?
Thanks, Michael. And Natasha, I've just seen your question, which I think reflects what was raised a little earlier, and I know it could open up a whole nother hour and a half. But really, what practical actions can we take to catalyze a more widespread lived experience of love? And I know we don't have time for that, but I'm going to leave that question with both of you because, well, I don't know if you want to take a minute each to just raise a response to that question. But I will certainly bring, yeah, Karima.
Tamzin, I would just like to, for all of us, just to remember, when we hear society, what does society mean? Society comes from socios, companions. Society means to come together as friends. That is the etymological meaning of society. We have it all there in our language. And I love this experience of companionship with every one of you. The ones who spoke, the one who asked, the ones who just by their mere presence filled this space and this place with beautiful resonance. And I'm looking forward to more conversations with friends.
Thank you, Karima. And also, Tamsin has highlighted Cher's question about the governance of Wales, including the responsibility for future generations in their charter. And is that an expression of love. And that would be very interesting to pursue, but I think it's an effort to include that. And I also think that while I welcome the conversation on love, that there are other words that are less charged, like compassion, for example, is a good example of another word for expressing that. You know, the phrase kindness is love with its work boots on, which I mentioned, is another way of saying that. So and I like the concept that Karima and Louis both used as humanizing society. There's a phrase that expresses the intention for mutuality, for kindness, for compassion, for love, in a language that is not as polarizing as the word love can be, although love is its purest manifestation. So I just want to, as we close, I just want to say, this is my idea of a real conversation where we aren't, as Joan said, reaching conclusions. We've had vigorous expressions of different points of view that were respectful, that were open. And, you know, when we have these contrasting views, it actually makes the conversation more vibrant and alive than when we're simply all agreeing. So I want to express my gratitude to all of you and to Tamsin for bringing us together.